Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to reintroduce to you now. Caryn Zinn, PhD, is a returning guest on our show. Be sure to check out her first appearance on episode 333 of Boundless Body Radio. Caryn Zinn, PhD, is a New Zealand registered dietitian and senior lecturer at AUT University in New Zealand. Her research and clinical practice work focuses on the whole foods, low carbohydrate, healthy fat nutrition approach and its application to metabolic health and sports performance. After spending her career following conventional nutritional wisdom with her practice and research, she had to pivot and has changed her mind and flipped the food pyramid upside down. She is the author of several books, which include What the Fat, Fats In, Sugar Out, How to Live the Ultimate Low-Carb Healthy Fat Lifestyle, and What the Face, How to Look and Feel Good from the Inside Out. With over 25 years of experience, Caryn's mission is to change the world and spread the whole food message to improve global health. It was an absolute joy to finally get to meet Caryn in person at the Symposium for Metabolic Health in San Diego this year. You can find Dr. Caryn Zinn on Twitter at Caryn Zinn or on her website at www.carynzinn.com. Dr. Caryn Zinn, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you back to Boundless Body Radio.
Hi, Casey, and nice to see you again, only after a month of seeing you in the flesh, but great to be here. Thanks for having me again.
Such a joy. I'm so glad we got to connect in person for the first time. And I was just telling you off the air, I didn't know you were attending. I try to be really good about looking through all the attendees who are going to be there, and I don't recall seeing your name. But then as you know, a presentation was done and people were lining up to ask questions, I immediately recognized your voice. I looked back, I'm like, oh my goodness, Caryn Zinn. I think you said your name. That helped too. But yeah, it was great to see you there.
Yeah, the dead giveaway blended South African Kiwi accent.
It's very distinct. I love it. That's amazing. I've been asking everybody since the show, what were some of your main takeaways now that it's been about a month since it's been over? What are some things you reflect back on as far as that conference? What made that really special for you?
Yeah, I'll have to say, the content was awesome, and we can talk about that in a minute. But for me, being at a conference, particularly an international conference where, coming from New Zealand, you've got to, like long haul, extraordinaire, to get there is a bit of a deal. It's the networking, and it's the, bumping into people like you and meeting everyone who you read about, who you deal with over email. It's really just getting together and hanging out and having good quality conversations about research and practice with the people that you respect in this field. So that was the biggie for me. But in terms of content, I'll have to say, even though I'm not specifically in this area myself, the whole concept of metabolic psychiatry is just super, super interesting. And there was a whole day and a bit on metabolic psychiatry. And I just think it's fabulous. And I also think that that us poor people, I'm going to take the little victim here just for a moment. For the past 10 years, us poor people have been banging on about low carb and weight loss and diabetes. And we've been, coming up against brick walls and complaints and deregistrations and all this turmoil, and eventually it's coming right, and in the diabetes space it's come right. And I think we've laid the platform so beautifully for metabolic psychiatry that it's just like, boom, it's in. There's research, there's practice, people are on board, end of story, no complaints, and I think it's probably not as simple as that, but it's really nice. And I think it's amazing that it's getting traction as quickly and as sort of elegantly as it is. I think that's real progress in the field.
It's so amazing. I've gotten that exact same answer every time I've asked the question about the conference from somebody who's there. The day that was all about metabolic psychiatry was absolutely unbelievable. It's so crazy to reflect on the convergence of a phone game, a computer game I'm hardly even familiar with, Roblox, the inventor of Roblox, their son, Matt Mizuki, having bipolar, and now them putting all of this money into research in the low carbohydrate community. It's astounding to think, like, just 2 or 3 years ago, this could have never been done. And now it's being done. It's so exciting.
Absolutely. And, hats off to those philanthropists and a call out to any more. We need some philanthropists throwing us some money in New Zealand to continue our amazing diabetes research with low carb. But yeah, I agree. It's super, super commendable. And the space is, what I like about it is the space is broad. When you talk about low carb for diabetes, you've essentially got pre-diabetes, type 2 diabetes, and we're sneaking in type 1 because now we can. But with metabolic psychiatry, it's really broad. It's going from anxiety, depression, mild to moderate to severe, to bipolar, to schizophrenia, and then you've got the Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, Huntington, all that kind of stuff. And it's just started 100 years ago with epilepsy. Hello. That was a good start to the area. But it's so broad, and what I like about it is that the research that is being done is high quality research. So you're starting off with top quality research. There was a presentation, I think, by Drew Decker on was it bipolar? Oh, no, it wasn't. Sorry, it was on college students with depression and anxiety. And the research is done so beautifully. The quality is really high. So the outcomes that we get from it, you can't say, oh, this is it. This is the only study, therefore it is it. But you can say we're starting off with a really high quality base of research. And from that, you can start extending into practice quite soon on. So that was really cool. I need to connect with him, actually. Yeah, some great stuff going on.
Amazing. Yeah, it's amazing. You mentioned the broad range of topics that was covered on that day, and one that really stands out to me was Guido Frank and his research on anorexia nervosa, which it blows my mind to think that what looks like a very restrictive diet can help with people to restore their weight. It's so interesting that this diet makes people who are underweight gain weight and people who are overweight lose weight. I know of no other diet that can do that. Yeah. And you're right, like he's going through case studies and he is explaining like an N=1, case that he's working with. And he maybe had like 3 or 4, but it's also the level deeper than that where he starts to explain all the mechanisms and the reasons why this is happening. And it ties everything up in a nice little bow. It's so nice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that whole area, even though I don't work specifically with eating disorders, I really love the fact that there's this diet which, according to mainstream nutrition field, is fringe, it's fad, it's dangerous, and we know it's none of those, but it's coming in and helping an area which is so incredibly hard to help. Eating disorders as a psychological disorder, it's just a really, really tough gig. So it's really nice to marry one of the real tough psychological disorders with a diet that, as you say, is really restrictive, but is seen to be fringe, but actually could be super, super helpful in this space. I just love it. And I think that, the mainstream dietitians and other areas need to sit up and listen and go, actually, wow, there's something to this. Let's explore this.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I love that. Well, it's one thing for me to go to a conference like this. I'm just a lay person, and I've got all of your baseball cards, and I want you to sign the bobblehead dolls and all the things. You guys are like all my heroes. I've got the Dr. Chafee posters. I want them to sign. I'm just kidding. Anyway, like it's one thing for a lay person to go there and be able to brush shoulders with doctors like yourself, people doing so much research and writing books and all this content. And that's one thing. But one thing I have not really been able to appreciate as much is how much you appreciate rubbing elbows with doctors as well, because we all think that you guys communicate with each other, you talk to each other all the time, everybody's sharing best practices, and that doesn't necessarily seem to be the case. Everybody still is a bit of a silo wherever they are in the world, and so it must be nice to not only meet bums like me who worship you guys, but also to be able to talk to Georgia Eid and talk to Nicole Ron and all these other practitioners. That must be very cool to be in the same room and do that in person.
It is. You totally undersell yourself. Totally. That is not true. Bums like yourself. That's absolute nonsense. But, it might be that in the States, like if you look at how many of low-carb conferences or metabolic health symposiums and sugar summits and things, that exist during that, you can literally jump from month to month to a conference if he lived in the States. And in that case, everyone would be rubbing shoulders and know each other really well. And maybe it's different for them, but for me, and I know for my colleague Tamsin from South Africa, from the Noakes Foundation, she doesn't travel much, and I didn't actually know that she was going to be there. I saw her name, but it said online presentation, Tamsin Murphy online presentation. I'm like, oh, bummer, because we've just publishing a paper together, and we've been on various Zooms, and literally I walked into that conference room on the first day, and I saw her standing right there, and I think I screamed louder than I've ever screamed in my life. It was just super, super cool. So yeah, it is really good to come from afar. But also I have to say, like, you can Zoom yourself silly, but there's nothing like personal contact. And the other interesting thing about being at a conference is time and context. And I'll tell you something really interesting. I know you're interviewing Mickey soon. So Dr. Mickey Willardin, a friend and colleague of mine from New Zealand, we've worked together for years. But when we catch up in New Zealand, it's like, we've got an hour, and then she's got to run off and I've got to run off and all this stuff. And we traveled together, and we had like sort of 7-8 days together at the conference. And we planned out our research program for the next several years during that conference. So wow. This is me and a woman that lives 15 minutes up the road from me, but it takes an allocation of time and context and discussions with other people about their research for us to actually just to knuckle down and plan. And since we've been back, we've already had one meeting. We're looking at some funding applications and an ethics application. So it's so good. People see conferences as it's just a big big party, and you go and you drink and you party. It's actually not like that. There's a lot of amazing stuff that comes out of being in person.
Absolutely. I mean, we were all in San Diego. It was perfect weather, and we're all spending the entire weekend, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, in a conference room. That's how good it was.
Yes, absolutely.
That's amazing. Well, I was able to talk to Tamsin last week. She is absolutely lovely.
Great.
I'm looking forward to my conversation with Mickey. But yeah, they are very special. And next time, it's coming up to January, and I'm looking to go to Boca, and I think to myself, oh, it's a 4-hour flight. I have to change
God.
2 time zones. It's the worst. It's so terrible. I'll stop complaining when I remember
4 hours. Oh my God, I would do that. I would go there for one day.
That's amazing. Yeah, I really do take it for granted that we're able to attend so many of these over here, but it's cool that we attract such an international audience as well. And all of your inputs are amazing. I really would have loved it if you would have been a presenter there as well. But anyway, cool. It's really great to get your thoughts on all of that. You have been on the show. It's been over 2 years. We've told your personal story. I think it's really interesting how you kind of got into this, being a dietitian for as long as you had been, and then to actually be a little bit challenged. Can you tell us about how you discovered the low carbohydrate nutrition space?
Yeah, so it probably was about 10 years ago now, and I'm not sure of the exact words that I told the story, but I think there was probably some gaps that I left out. And I think one of the gaps I left out was I was brought onto a PhD supervision as a skeptical mainstream dietitian. So Catherine Crofts, who's you might know of her, she's kind of she's New Zealand pharmacist, academic, but also expert in hyperinsulinemia. And she was doing her PhD supervised by Professor Grant Schofield and someone else. At the time, I can't remember. And they were looking at event sponsorship or management. It was like, oh my God, so boring. Anyway, she changed her topic and decided to come into this hyperinsulinemia space, and she managed to connect with Joseph Kraft, the late Joseph Kraft, and got his massive database on insulin assays. And so this whole area of insulin resistance and hyperinsulinemia was being talked about among them. And I was brought on as like, oh, let's bring Caryn on as the secondary supervisor for this for the supervision, because she's going to rebut everything we say about carbohydrates, because we think carbohydrates are not the way to go, and I'm going to come in and defend them. So that was a really interesting start, and it was a pretty bumpy ride in the beginning, because I think it's when you start seeing some information and hearing some information and talking about fundamental principles of pathophysiology in the body, like insulin resistance and how the body cannot tolerate carbohydrate if you're insulin resistant. Who is insulin resistant? Well, actually, most of the population. If you've got pre-diabetes, diabetes, you've got polycystic ovaries, ovarian syndrome, menopause. So hello, that's half our population will be moving towards or getting insulin resistant at some part of their lives, and a host of other conditions as well. So when you start understanding that most of the population cannot actually process, metabolize, store, handle their carbohydrates like a metabolically perfect person, the 5% of the population that are that, then you start to question, well, why are we shoveling carbohydrates down them? It's a really simple question. And I'm like, oh my God, why did I not question this? Going through my dietetic training, going through the first, 10 years of my academic career, why did I not actually question this? And the reason why I didn't question it, so I'd never come across the terminology of insulin resistance or hyperinsulinemia. It wasn't a thing. It's always been a thing, but it just wasn't out there. And that really opened my eyes. And I just thought, you just can't go back to where you were once you sort of enlightened to this new way of thinking. The high fat thing was a big issue for me. The low carb was less so, but the high fat was a big issue, and that has morphed over the years. But that took a lot of reading and researching and deliberating about the whole saturated fat concept and all that kind of stuff. And then, of course, as a dietitian who really understands food composition, I realized that you can actually do LCHF, low carb, healthy fat, in a way that doesn't ruffle feathers or make your hair stand on end. So you don't have to pour cream, butter, cheese, bacon on absolutely everything you eat, but rather you can still go higher fat, but have more monos and polyunsaturated fats, and emphasize protein a little bit more. So that was my entry into it. I'm just sort of digressing a little bit, but what followed was really interesting. It was years of criticism from my dietetic colleagues. So I belong to the New Zealand Dietitians Board, and I have to every year get my practicing certificate and continuing competency and all that. So there were formal complaints, not by clients, they were doing really well, by colleagues who would see things that I'd say in the media or on TV productions and things, and they'd complain. Like I'd say something like, fat doesn't make you fat. Oh, that was just, had everyone up in arms, and I had all these complaints about it. And those sorts of things. I did some work with a school, in a boarding school in Auckland. We analyzed the diet, and there was something like, I can't even remember how much sugar initially was in the diet, but we managed to remove like 40 teaspoons of sugar from the diet, and we did it in consultation with the chefs, with the school, with the parents, and with the kids. And
Wow.
BMI dropped, waist circumference dropped, health improved. Yet a dietitian wrote into the Dietitians Board and the Ministry of Education complaining that I am, tampering with our children's diets, and I shouldn't be doing this because it's really dangerous for them. I mean, can you believe it? That's just horrendous. And then it kind of died down for a while. And I'll just finish. I know this is a bit long-winded, but I'll finish by saying that last year, so I was complaint-free for years, and I thought, oh, finally, it's all gone away. It's brilliant. And then last year, a dietitian who is studying a PhD, I won't mention anything more than that, they put a complaint in about me and something that the medical students were shown that I was in, and it was all about low-carb diets for type 2 diabetes in our Maori and Pacific Island populations. And they were complaining that the medical students are being taught this stuff about low-carb, and we know very well that there's no evidence to suggest that low-carb diets and type 2 diabetes is actually a thing. I'm like, oh my God, you are living under a rock. You are doing a PhD and you don't even know how to do a literature review. This is ridiculous. And my rebuttal took me about 5 minutes to just like, boom, email it off. And of course it came back with like, we will not be taking this any further. This is ridiculous.
Wow, that is crazy. Do you dietitians just have a common practice to like troll each other and complain about each other? Like
Funny.
how much time have you spent in your career complaining about what other people are doing?
Do you know, I'll tell you something, you laugh. When I was in my early days, that was me. So there's this kind of nutrition police kind of hat that we wear, what I used to wear. And I would see things and it would be about personal trainers, and personal trainers would be talking about nutrition. And I'd be going, you shouldn't be talking about nutrition. It's not within your brief. And you said this and it's not true. And we'd be the complaining group. And oh my goodness, I'm so glad I've broken out from that mold, because the reality is that dietitians are not the gatekeepers for nutrition. Everyone should be talking about nutrition. Unfortunately, we don't all agree on what the one source of truth is with nutrition. I think everyone agrees, and this is where the kind of safety thing is, everyone agrees that eating a diet that is based on whole, unprocessed, unpackaged food predominantly is a good thing, and anyone with half a brain cell can work out what that is, right? It's stuff that doesn't come in packets: meat, fish, chicken, eggs, milk, dairy. It does come in packets, but it's from a cow. Fruit, vegetables, nuts, seeds. It's easy to kind of navigate that. I think the dietitians have gotten a little better over the years. I went through the early stages of my sort of low-carb transformation and wanting to work with the dietitians, and my mission is to transform the dietitians and blah blah blah. And actually I've decided that I want to take the path of least resistance and actually do the work that is most productive. So I do my research and I do my practice, and the dietitians will come around, but it's not my sole job to make them see the light. They'll see the light like I did.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Going back to, as you were learning about low carbohydrate and taking the time, necessary to learn about it and make sure, you weren't misleading people with that information. I wonder if you can relate to this. I'm just curious. Like, I wish I could go back and talk to myself 10 years ago, because I know in 2014, Nina Teichol's wrote her book, The Big Fat Surprise. I listened to a radio interview that she gave where she explained some of her contents. I was super interested. I'd already been a personal trainer for a while. I thought fat was good at the time, and her concept sounded very interesting. But according to my Facebook history thing, I didn't actually crack the book open until 2016. And I want to go back and ask myself if there was some kind of like cognitive dissonance, or thinking like, okay, if this woman's right, and she might be, then everything I've been taught before this is wrong. Was there a bit of that with you as well, or not so much?
It certainly wasn't an ego thing. Like, yeah, it wasn't an ego thing, but it was more that it's almost like a cult or a religion or something. When you're in it and you believe in it so strongly that you can't possibly see that it could be wrong. So it's not about, oh goodness, what a waste, this could be wrong. Like, I don't care. The science changes and you move with it and you pivot and all that kind of stuff. But it was more when I came through university, I did an undergraduate degree in physiology. I did a physiology degree. We never taught about insulin resistance. Can you believe that?
It's wild.
And then I did my dietetics, and our professors were all well respected, and it was a different era to now. Our students of today, they sit there with their phones, with their computers, with their iPads, and they challenge everything you say. When I was back in university, I sound like a bit of a dinosaur, but we didn't have these devices where we could challenge them on the minute. Why, when somebody told me about the nutrition guidelines, what would be any reason that I would say, well, show me the evidence? What's the evidence? Why would you why would you mistrust, and you trust that the evidence is behind it? There was no need to ask about it or look into it. So I think when I sort of changed my philosophies 10 years ago, it wasn't the first time I came across it. There was the Atkins diet in the 80s. And I remember talking to my students about about how dangerous this was, and how saturated fat gives you bad breath and ketosis and it's bad for you, and it's, you know, it's fatal, all these misconceptions, right? And I was one of those people who kind of dissed it. And then there comes a time where you just, your knowledge base and probably your career maturity gets to a point where you go, there's something, you know, there's something here that's not quite right. Let's take the time and explore it. So I didn't really care that, I mean, I did care that what I learned was wrong, but it was more like, it can't be wrong, it can't be wrong. And then you do the research to try and prove that it's not wrong, and you find that you can't prove it. So then it's like, well, this is a real predicament. What do I do now? I can actually leave my profession and go work in a cheese shop forever.
Yeah.
Or just, you know, take every day as it comes and decide what you're going to do. And that's essentially what happened.
Wow. Well, I really respect that perspective and the way you shifted and with the way you practice, because it's a lot different. Somebody like you, a registered dietitian and a doctor, versus somebody like me who's just a nutrition coach. I can say whatever I like. It's a lot more challenging for you. And so I really appreciate that perspective. And it's interesting that you mentioned, you know, that the dietitians are not the gatekeepers anymore for nutrition work. And you're right. Like, we have devices. This is one of the great things about the internet, is you can look this up. We talked last time about podcasts and magazines and books and all kinds of different resources that people get out there. If they want to find the information, they'll find it.
Yep, absolutely. It's not a closed shop. I think, you know, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. You know, it's accessible, it's amazing, you find great stuff, but also it's a dark place. And I think, again, if you don't have you need some sort of fundamentals to be able to understand stuff. And, you know, I get a lot of clients that come to see me and they go, I've just been on the internet and I see so many things and I'm so confused. So can I just talk to you? And, you know, that's the consultation, and it's sort of sifting through all the nonsense that you do get. And some of it, again, you think it's nonsense, but it might not be nonsense. You know, the classic one is the carnivore diet, when you go, oh gosh, this is absolute nonsense. Plants are not going to kill you. And then there's subtly more to it, you know, so there's an element of truth.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, I did want to ask you about some of the things we talked about last time and see if you've changed your mind, shifted thinking. One thing I did want to make sure I asked you is, we were talking 2 years ago and we were quite optimistic that things were turning around, that more people were getting this information. It's been 2 years since we had that conversation. Where are you feeling with that now? Do you think we're continuing to make progress, or do we still have a long, long ways to go?
In the low carb space?
The low carb message in general, I would say.
Yeah, no, I definitely think we're getting somewhere. I mean, I'm not sure when we talked 2 years ago. I'm just trying to think. 2 years ago, I had put in a research grant. I don't know if it had been approved or not, but 2 years on, we're in the, you know, the start of our 3-year government-funded research project looking at changing the way healthcare is delivered to people with pre-diabetes and type 2 diabetes in primary care, so at the doctor's clinic. So, you know, the government have basically said, yep, we'll back you. We're giving you 1.3 million New Zealand dollars to do this 3-year project. And that is just like, whoa, I've been trying for 6 years to get this grant. And then finally it's approved. Now, actually, as we're trying to implement, we're working with clinics, and I think the flavor is there and the desire is there, and it's a lot more out there and semi-mainstream than it used to be. There's still resistance about the saturated fat LDL cardiovascular thing. That is still a thing. The low carb thing is not really an issue. We know that we can get B vitamins and fiber from other nutrients, but it's that whole area of lipidology that still needs to move from a scientific perspective a little bit further before people feel comfortable with it. And then, of course, in New Zealand, we've got a primary healthcare crisis. Like the doctors are overworked. There's, you know, they've got patients waiting outside the doors for weeks. It's just it's an unsustainable system. So, you know, the morph into different workforces like health coaches, training health coaches properly and bringing them into primary care. So this is the research that we're doing. It's not randomized controlled trial stuff. It's implementation science, which is doing something, implementing something in a real life context, and then evaluating it as it goes along. So certainly, I definitely think in 2 years it has moved. Even in New Zealand, it's moved, and it's, when it comes to the whole metabolic psychiatry and that whole mental health area, it's moved with like leaps and bounds in that area. So yes, we're progressing. Yay.
Okay, that's great. Well, I appreciate that perspective. Again, when we talked earlier, you took an interesting kind of approach in the way that you were helping your clients do this. And obviously, this is very general and very high level, but using the approach of what you and I would call like a low carbohydrate approach, where we're just going to take the carbohydrates down. It doesn't need to be zero. It doesn't need to be totally ketogenic, but we can use that as a starting point. I really like that approach because I just think it makes it so much more accessible and friendly to everybody. And then once people kind of get used to the lower amount of carbohydrates, they can decide like, well, I'm already feeling good. I'm losing weight. Maybe this will get better if I go even further. And they can maybe handle that a bit more, or even decide, do I need these at all, and try a carnivore diet. But have you continued to kind of use that approach of let's at least get the carbohydrates down below, what would you call like low carbohydrate? Is that like 150 for you?
Yeah, so that is interesting, and that is one thing that hasn't changed over the last 2 years. I'm still doing that because I still think keto is, the need to do a ketogenic diet and having high levels of ketones is for your psychological, neurological disorders. Definitely, that therapeutic edge is what you need. I sit in the low carb space, so it's a classic example. I had a type 1 diabetic yesterday who, it was interesting. He so he was a builder, and he said, I bought your book. I got diagnosed 5 years ago with type 1. Bought your book, what the fat, and I went keto, and I did this, and I had beautiful blood sugars, and everything was great. And then I'm like, well, why are we talking now if everything was great? Oh, and I was, I just sort of fell off. And, being a builder typically lends itself to pies and energy drinks and all that kind of stuff. And it was, I constantly get this client that has done keto before, and it's worked so beautifully for them up until the point that it hasn't. And I just think it is too strict for a lot of people. And I think people don't really understand that they can do keto for a little bit and then come back to the low carb space and then do keto for a little bit. Obviously, body composition needs to be, if that's a goal, it needs to be put into the equation, and things need to be adjusted to align. But I always say to people when I'm talking to them, I say, look, our guidelines suggest, moderate to high carbohydrate diet. We're looking at 250, 300 plus grams of carbohydrate per day. The ketogenic diet is about 20 to 30 grams of carbohydrate per day. I'd like you to sit, depending on the context. They've got pre-diabetes or type 2 diabetes. I might say to them, I'd like you to sit somewhere between the 50 and 100 mark per day. If you go closer to 50, you'll probably get a better outcome, but know that you can sort of sit within that range. If you go over 100 every now and again, that's totally fine. If you want to go to keto, that's totally fine, as long as you can stick to it and truly be honest about sticking to it. So I really work with the context of who and what I've got in front of me. And you get my initial consultations are 1 hour, and I get a really good gauge about who they are, what their life is like, or what their family life is like, what their abilities are like for cooking, that kind of stuff. And you kind of make a call, and then that's where your follow-ups are for, is to assess where they're at in this kind of range, and work from there. So yeah, definitely that low carb space. I know definition wise, keto is really beautifully defined. Low carb is not so beautifully defined. And I think having it under, our definition in New Zealand is anything under 45% of total energy. Well, I mean, that's ridiculous, because it could be 43%, and that's not really low carb. So I work in grams, and it also depends on what you've got in front of you. If you're working with an athlete that's doing 500, 600, 700 grams of carbohydrate a day, you'd either go hardcore and fat adapt them for a while, or you might sit at like the 150, 200 grams and toggle between under 100 and up to 200, depending on their training sessions. And again, it's very, it's very dependent on who you're talking to and what their goal is as to where you go, as to where I go anyway.
Yeah, no, I love that. I did want to ask you about something you mentioned earlier, which initially to all of us seems absolutely ridiculous, which is a carnivore diet. And you've been in this space long enough to see the popularity of the carnivore diet rise. My observation is it seems to just really self-select people who either their personality aligns this way or they have some type of addictive behavior around carbohydrate. And I would just say, like, you can do the test to find out whether you're a carbohydrate addict or not. With myself, the most simple thing is when you consume carbohydrate, do you then consume more than you had wanted to? Like, for me personally, if you put a plate of French fries in front of me, I wish I could just have one and taste it, but I don't. I just keep it going until it's totally gone. And so for me to do carnivore, it's just easier. Again, whether I have a bona fide like food addiction, sugar addiction, or just my personality, is just easier to say, like, I'm just not going to mess with that. I'm going to just pretty much completely abstain from carbohydrate and plant foods and just worry about, steak and eggs and that kind of thing. And that keeps me quite energetic and happy. What have been your thoughts about the carnivore diet and how that's kind of evolved your thinking around it?
Yeah, it is interesting because I think, there are a lot of people, and I don't even think you have to be addicted to carbohydrates. There are a lot of people who would sit in front of a plate of chips and not be able to have one. And I don't think that those people would have some kind of psychological disorder. I just think it's human nature. Food tastes nice, and you just overeat every now and again. And I think for some people that's okay. For other people, it turns into this spiral. So I think the problem starts is when you have the plate of chips, and then you reach for the packet of biscuits, followed by this, followed by that, and then your whole week is turned into a hot mess. And to bring yourself back, you're like crawling up a tunnel or something. So I think that there's a difference there in the spectrum of carbohydrate addiction. The carnivore diet, it's just so fascinating. I think that there is a very, very, very small percentage of the population that has a true problem with plants. Okay, and that's really where the carnivore diet comes in. What is it? It's a platform where you are removing all plant matter. Why would you remove all plant matter? Not necessarily because you're addicted, but because you have an issue. Your body reacts to plants. So the original kind of idea about the carnivore diet was that it's a temporary healing, like the ultimate elimination diet. So you've got gut issues because the diagnostics are so terrible. Nobody really knows what's going on in the gut apart from the fact you've got gut issues. You eliminate some stuff, it might get partially better. You eliminate a lot of stuff, you might get a lot better. So people who struggle with plants might eliminate all plants, and so for 3 months, their gut heals, they feel good, brilliant. And then if the body heals according to how it should heal, then it's designed to then bring plants back in very small or in a gradual approach over time. And you might not be able to bring all of them back, but you can bring some of them back. And that was really when carnivore first sort of came into the scene. So people with really, really severe gut-related or, maybe autoimmune or arthritic conditions. Equally, I do know people who have removed all animals and have got amazing outcomes too. So we don't see, we talk about the whole vegan approach, and, they get annihilated by people like us for various reasons, like, you're not getting nutrients, and it's all tied up with religion and all, all this stuff. But actually some people, and I'm not an advocate for a vegan diet, because I think, hands down, animal diet or omnivorous diet wins from a nutrient perspective. But some people remove animals and they feel a whole lot better, and some of the gut-related issues go away. So I think it works both ways. I do think that the carnivore diet has moved into something which makes me a little nervous. And I know that some practitioners are putting people with diabetes straight on the carnivore diet. They're bypassing low carb, healthy, low carb, healthy fat, lots of vegetables, whole food, and going straight to carnivore. And lots of people will have good outcomes, absolutely, because it is the ultimate elimination diet. But who says you can't have great outcomes in that intermediate space? And for me, my process of working would be someone comes to see me, they're a complicated case, they've got gut issues, they've got all sorts of stuff. We start in that, here's the template of whole food. Let's take out all the aggravating things like that we know of, like grains and sugar and lots of alcohol and all that kind of stuff. See where they sit. If they get partially better but not completely better, that's when you start moving into diets like autoimmune protocol or potentially carnivore, or you go keto and then maybe you go carnivore and you trial it out. But I'm nervous that carnivore is becoming just oh yeah, try the carnivore. And of course you lean up really nicely, you get into ketosis, you feel amazing. We don't know anything about the carnivore diet, and I'm not anti it. I'm not anti it. I have put some clients on it, but purposefully. I just think we don't know enough about it long term. And anyone who says, well, look at our ancestors, they were, raised on an animal only diet. Well, they weren't. It was animal and plants. So we don't know how eating the carnivore diet in the context of our modern environment, how that plays out. And like, I'm not willing to go on the carnivore diet just to see how I might be in 20 years time. It's not something that I, but I do respect people who make those choices for good reasons. Some people I found out being on the carnivore diet actually don't really like vegetables and have never liked vegetables. So it's part of the move, and it might be considered a lazy man's diet because they don't have to cook all the vegetables and chop them up. They can be quite annoying at times, and you can just like eat meat. It's just easier. So look, I'm not anti it for the right reasons, but I do get a bit nervous that it seems to be a default landing, and we don't know enough about it in terms of athletes. We know there are a lot of studies on the ketogenic diet in athletes, but there are no studies on the carnivore diet in athletes. So if you hear otherwise, you can jump up and say, well, actually, no, there aren't any studies.
Yeah, I really appreciated that very thoughtful answer. It's funny, I reflect back on this opposing for metabolic health. I'm sitting next to my friend Robin, who has reversed her bipolar. She eats a very strict ketogenic diet. We're sitting there listening to Brett Scher's presentation where he's talking to Hannah Warren. And it's so funny to like, I turned to Robin. I'm like, this is the only room you could be in the world where you could say, I eat a plant-based vegetarian type diet. It's reversed my bipolar. And she's almost got to kind of whisper it in the audience, or a little bit defensive when
Totally.
look at the result. Look how well she's doing, doing the exact opposite. It's amazing that we have so many different approaches that can definitely work for a lot of different things at a lot of different times in our life. So yeah, I thought that was quite funny.
Totally. And I think we need to be very, very careful about, if it works for me, then it will work for everyone sitting in front of me. And everyone has got a different context, and as a practitioner you have to listen and learn and prod and go for the path of least resistance to get to where you want to get to. I think you need to be loyal to that.
Yeah, absolutely. As much as I love and so much respect Dr. Anthony Chaffee, and I love his message, I'm part of his book club, and the idea, I've really just shifted my thinking around plants are trying to kill you. I try to think less that way and think more like it's not personal that plants are trying to kill you. They don't care about you. The plants are trying to protect themselves. And what that means is they have certain level of defenses. Some plants are completely toxic and you can't have them. Others are fine. And if you cook them and soak them and prepare, there's so many different ways that people can have them, or they're not having massive doses of raw spinach in a smoothie every single day. You know what I mean? The plants are trying to kill you. Again, I get it and I appreciate it, but also I don't think, like you said, there may be a very small percentage of the population that must do a very strict carnivore diet and can't handle any plant material.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think Anthony Chaffee probably achieved his mission, which was to get airtime, because a title like "Plants Are Going to Kill You" has stimulated conversation across the world for several years now. So probably mission accomplished, but we need to just be a little careful with the public and the population.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. One other topic that you brought up that I really wanted to talk to you about today was also performance. I know you've done so much work in sports performance. You mentioned the research being done in ketogenic diets with sports performance, especially as it pertains to very high glycolytic type sports. You know, I know you've worked with rugby athletes in the past. We tend to think of those activities as such high heart rate, burning primarily glucose as the fuel source. What is the research borne out as far as reducing the carbohydrates in the diet to be very, very low to a ketogenic level for those types of athletes that are also doing that high-end type of exercise?
Yeah, so it is interesting because there's been the publication of several studies in the high intensity space that has looked at, so high intensity HIIT, high intensity interval training, very glycolytic, which means utilizing glucose as a fuel source, coming through glycolysis. And the studies that have been done well in that they've fat adapted athletes for a lengthy period of time, so 4 weeks plus, so to make sure that they're fully fat adapted, and they've compared them to high carb athletes. And several of these studies have actually found that while the ketogenic diet doesn't necessarily improve performance relative to the high carb athletes, it's not decreasing performance either. And I think that message is a very important message, because every second athlete that I talk to has got gut issues. And when you got gut issues, there's a carbohydrate food quality kind of link there, and they just do better on a lower carbohydrate diet. So I think that we need to, you know, I know the kind of gold medalists just go high performance at all costs, gold medals at all costs, but I think we can't separate health from performance. And actually that's moving in positive directions in the high performance sports space. There's health is on the menu, which is great. And I think that when you take into consideration the health of the athlete, you'll find that there are lots of athletes that can fare very, very well on low carb or ketogenic diets when they're doing glycolytic activity. Absolutely. So again, it can go horribly wrong if you change your diet 2 weeks before you've got a CrossFit competition. You know, you wouldn't do it like that. You'd do it sensibly. You would fat adapt, and you might even fat adapt and not stay fat adapt. Oh, no, you will stay fat adapted, but not stay on the ketogenic diet forever, but bring more carbohydrates in some training sessions that are more glycolytic and just are a bit sort of higher intense, that have a high intensity, and you just need a little bit more nutritional support in the form of carbohydrate. So that carbohydrate cycling thing, or that protocol, which is not actually, it's not actually grounded in evidence, because it just hasn't been tested, because it's, you know, how do you do that really? But it's that trial and error. If you fat adapt an athlete, you make them metabolically flexible, and then play around with carbohydrate, particularly if they're the glycolytic athlete, there should be no reason why an athlete can't fare very well, if not even better, because they're feeling better, and they're not performing with gut ache.
Yeah. I notice that all the time. I noticed it with myself when I was a cyclist, and if you're not fueling all the time, quote unquote fueling, I was eating, cookies, double chocolate cookies in the middle of rides, because like if you're not taking on carbohydrate during the ride, you run out of the carbohydrate. There's so little that we store, it runs out very quickly. And I remember just these long bike rides where my gut just hurt, my stomach would just be aching, and it just, you knew that's what you had to do at the time. And you mentioned the gut issues. I think also, the mental thing that we've talked about. What about athletes that are talking about, anxiety and performance anxiety before performances and that kind of thing? That's getting a little bit more attention, or, reaction time, or there's so many of those other things. And I also wonder what you've observed about injuries. I've been able to use a metabolic cart in the past to test some of the professional soccer players in my city and measure their metabolic rates and how they oxidize fat versus carbohydrates. And all of them had, generally speaking, much suppressed metabolic rates. So they weren't burning very many calories at a rested state. And the carbohydrate burn that these guys were burning at a rested state was super high. And my first thought was like, if you're burning through this many carbohydrates, what about injuries? Like, how is this going to impact your joints and your knees and all of that stuff? Like, is that something you notice that people, athletes on a ketogenic diet are more resistant to injury, or is that a bit of a stretch?
Look, I think I probably haven't seen enough athletes to go 100%. They're definitely less injuries, so that would be a stretch. But what I do know is that when you are on the ketogenic diet or low carb / ketogenic diet, there's definitely an improvement in recovery from exercise. So there's less muscle soreness. There's an improvement in recovery, and that might lead to less injury over time. I don't know. That actually hasn't been looked at all. So I probably can't provide any half decent comment there. But I do think because of the theory that goes with high levels of oxidative stress that comes with high carbohydrate, you could say theoretically, potentially the immune system and the injury rate could be higher when there's more oxidative stress, but that hasn't been borne out in the literature just yet.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, I would say anecdotally, maybe something that we would notice there, but yeah, if we don't have the research, hard to say definitively. You mentioned, introducing more carbohydrates, and you're absolutely right. Like for most athletes, there is a periodization of their program where some months they're training really hard, some months they're competing, some months they need to detrain, they need to take it easy and let their bodies fully recover. That matches really well with what we can do as far as nutrition and the timing of when we can put them on a stricter or more liberal kind of ketogenic diet. When you are adding in carbohydrates to somebody who is an athlete, especially in those glycolytic sports, like we said, what about timing in a day around their competition? I know that's something that you've looked at in the past in a research paper, but how does that affect the athlete?
It's so interesting because there isn't, in the carbohydrate-centric space, there are definitive guidelines about how much carbohydrate to have before, how much carbohydrate to have during exercise, and exactly how much carbohydrate, like 1 gram per kilogram body weight of carbohydrate for the recovery meal. So there's very definitive amounts to make you a high carb athlete. In the low carb or keto space, it's not there at all. It's just like, well, just eat something that fits with your kind of food plan. So it's not about the amount of carbohydrate, but if you are going to bring back some carbohydrate, again, there's no research on this, but from an anecdotal perspective, it's very individual. Some athletes find that if you nutritionally support their training period or their training session beforehand, that can be a little bit helpful. That can be helpful. Some people feel during that can be helpful, and other people find that if you're having a smoothie, for example, as a recovery meal, if you lift the amount of carbohydrate in that, then that can potentially help how you feel in general over that next day for training. So essentially, it's a pre-exercise meal, but just the day before. So I would definitely say before, during, and after, and what that actually is really dependent on trial and error and working out with the athlete what works best for them. One thing that I am hot on is that when you introduce carbohydrates, they're good quality carbohydrates. You don't go, right, so have 65 jet planes, lollies after your thing and see how you go. It's bringing in some starchy vegetables, some fruit. Fruit is great to put in smoothies. And it might be for athletes during, in an endurance type sport, to bring in some half strength sports drink or something if they don't react to it. So very, very trial and error, but you start with 20, 30, 40, 50 grams of carbohydrate and sort of work from there rather than just hit it back up to like 300 grams for the day.
Yeah, got it. Okay. Well, that's all very reasonable. I really appreciate your opinion as far as that goes. As I was preparing for this conversation and, pulling up your name and your website and everything, the ResearchGate page pops up. And I just cannot, I know you're doing a ton of work, but I cannot believe how many studies are in your name in ResearchGate. Like it's tons of different things. So you are a very busy person. Tell us what you were kind of like working on for the future. What gets you really excited these days?
Yeah, so our diabetes project, which is how it's unfolding in real life, is really what's kind of consuming my world at the moment. So that's good. The other thing we're working on is this whole area about food quality and ultra processed foods. Again, it's such a complex area. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the NOVA, which is a food classification system.
Yeah.
It's a Brazilian derived system. And we are kind of just looking at, well, we have tweaked that and we've made our own one because NOVA is a 4-category system. We've classified something called the HISS, which is the Human Interference Scoring System. So it's all about the level of processing, how little or how much your food is interfered with by human hands. So we've got a 3-category system. So number 1, whole, unprocessed, and minimally processed. Category 3 is like ultra processed, and then all the stuff in the middle is all the stuff in the middle. But honestly, so what we're doing with that, we've developed that system. We've piloted it and got some good outcomes there. What we're doing now is we're developing an app based on AI recognition. And we are trying to look at this to analyze diets, not in a way that's looking at carbs, protein, and fat and micronutrients, but more the level of processing. And while that sounds all amazing and very interesting, it is so complex. You think it's easy to classify foods according to food processing, and then you do that in your 3 categories, and then it doesn't sit right because some of the things that are really high in sugar are in category 1. And you go, this doesn't sit right. Yeah, it's not about nutrition and health. It's about food processing. So it just, it just kind of plays with your philosophies the whole time. So that's something that we're looking at. And then Mickey and I are looking at, and some exercise scientists at work, we are looking at progressing the science regarding women in sport. I think that's a hot topic at the moment. And there's a lot of stuff that's talked about as being concrete where it's not concrete evidence, like metabolic flexibility in women and menstrual cycle and things like that. So we're looking at forming some research questions and and looking at progressing that a little bit.
That'd be wonderful.
And a few other things on the go, but those are the kind of key ones at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. I have heard some people be a little critical of the NOVA system. I remember the first time it was explained to me, I thought, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And since then, I've heard people say, well, it didn't quite get this right or this wrong. What were you trying to improve upon with your rating system versus the NOVA system?
Yeah, good question. So the NOVA system category, so they've got their category 1 is whole, unprocessed. The category 2 is it's called culinary ingredients. So you put, oils and fats and things that you cook with in there. So, and then category 3 is more processed, and category 4 is ultra processed. So it would be nice to have a direction or a trajectory that it would go, but that category 2 just kind of sits there, and it sort of it seems to not fit because you generally don't drink olive oil on its own. So, you eat full meal, you eat whole meals, you eat like a hamburger with chips. And do you put that meal somewhere, or do you separate out into different ingredients? So it gets quite tricky. And what we were trying to do is just to try get a more of a like a move in a stepwise fashion from less processed to more processed. And we started off with a 4-system approach, or a 4-category approach, and we've collapsed the 2 middle categories just because it is just too hard. Because when you think you've got it under control, you go, well, what about plant milks? Where do they go? As opposed to, animal milks. I'm like, oh my God, is that category 2? That's a little bit more processed. And it just becomes such a a complex conversation that you have to really look at the big rocks. You have to look at the fundamentals, and the fundamentals are: do you eat Doritos or do you eat apples? We want to move you from category 3, where you're just eating packaged processed stuff that's lining the supermarkets, and we want to move you to category 1. And then if it's in category 2, it's kind of okay, but we want you to have more category 1. So we've got a green, orange, red system. And the nice thing about our app is that the AI basically recognizes the food that you eat, and then it spits out a little wheel, and a wheel about your day, and it tells you what percentage of your day is in red, yellow, and green.
Oh, nice.
And so it gives you some instant feedback there.
Wow.
Gosh, you better, now that I've said this out loud, it'll probably be ripped off by someone else, so we better get a move on with it. But yeah, so that's, look, I think the systems to categorize food processing are always going to be complex. There's a French system called Sigma or something that was brought out a couple of years ago, and they have introduced in their system, it's Nova plus something else, and it's like 8 categories, and each level has got additives, and like the level of additives that have evidence behind them built into it. So you start off on this pyramid approach, and every time that there's an additive in the food that's got evidence behind it, it sort of jumps one up on the pyramid. I'm like, oh my God, this is not going to be a public, how on earth are we going to sort this? It needs to be very, very simple.
So complex.
And that's been the problem with the guidance systems, of late. We've got one in New Zealand called the health star rating, and of course you pick up a food and it's got a 4-star on it and you think it's good, but there's so many flaws with it. Like, it gives negative points for saturated fat. It hasn't included various things that we think are important, and it's this complex algorithm that falls down when you actually have discussions about it. So we think it's a good guidance system, but actually we misguiding people.
Yeah. That's very, very interesting. I never thought about how difficult that would be, but even in the same food, type, like, you think yogurt, well, what type of yogurt do you mean? I can go to the store and buy, like Greek yogurt that's made, reasonably well, that has a decent fat content, or I can get yogurt that has basically like jam inside of it that you mix up and it's full of sugar.
Exactly. I know. I think we've had more discussions about trying to get this category sorted than anything else in my life. It's just it's been crazy.
Wow. Well, we always know you have so much work on your plate, but you're doing such great work and getting the message out to more and more people. I was very happy to hear that you are feeling more optimistic that the message is moving forward. Like I said, it was so great to meet you in person this year at the Symposium for Metabolic Health, and appreciate how much more difficult it was for you to get there than it was for me to get there. It was about an 1.5 hour flight from Salt Lake City, so no complaints for me as far as that goes. But Dr. Caryn Zinn, where would you like people to go to find you and connect with you and your work?
Well, as you said, my website, carynzinn.com, my Twitter handle @CarynZinn, and what else is there? My Facebook page, which I'm not very active on, Caryn Zinn Dietitian. You can go there if you want to find me. There's also the good old fashioned Google, like no one uses Google anymore. Just Google if you want to get in touch. That's absolutely fine. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. Well, we will link to all of that in the show notes. You keep things very simple, and I love your website, actually. It's not full of a bunch of stuff. It's really clean and concise, and there's a contact form, and everything is there really, really easy, so people can get a hold of you if they want to work with you. But I just so much love chatting with you and learning from you, and I really appreciate how you can approach all of this with a bit of nuance and not just a one-size-all kind of approach. And yes, it is a little bit more frustrating to have to try to figure this out on the individual basis, but that's what we need to do. And knowing there's so many options that people can go and decide what works best for them, and to have your help with that is awesome. So thank you so very much for all of your work, and thank you for taking the time to be on our show today. We really appreciate you.
You are very welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
It was such an honor. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.